later than 9 p.m.
Come on, is that agreed? Agreed. Deputy Keaveney.
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the technical group for facilitating me with the speaking time on this very important matter. It is indeed a pleasure to be afforded an opportunity to exercise my freedom of speech within the National Parliament. Cancórla, the raison d'etre of this debate for both sides is to immediately object to the other person's position, and is a position on either side to merely oppose. There has been, in general, in my view, a failure to engage with the fundamental first principles of either side of the debate. Many on the pro-life side of this debate have, as their fundamental starting point, a profound respect for human life and believe that life starts at conception. It is unsurprising that people holding this belief cannot yield from the resistance of the proposals in this legislation. Indeed, Cancórla, many on the pro-choice side of this debate have as their fundamental starting point a profound respect for the liberty of the individual, the right of the woman to the autonomy over her own body, and believe that the unborn is not, up until the point in its development, of sufficient moral status to override the individual liberty and the right of that autonomy and the autonomy over one's body. Both of these views are sincerely held. I repeat, both of these reviews are sincerely held. But it's rare that either side of this debate recognise the sincerity of the other person's position, preferring instead to ascribe motives that are unacceptable about the others. Pro-life people are not motivated by a desire to control a woman or to impose a theocracy on the state. And pro-choice people are not motivated by a desire to murder babies, nor do they suffer a callous indifference to human life. It may be that given that the different starting points of either side of this debate, that it is not possible for a reconciliation of both positions. And that's an explanation that I can only offer. It's become clear to me, Cancórla, that this debate has become a dialogue of the deaf. It's marked by invective, it's marked by insults, it's marked by reluctance to even understand the other side's position or views. And it's an explanation, it's not an excuse. Passions have run hot in this debate, and rightfully so. But some restraint is needed, and it ought to be governed by an acceptance of the motivations of the other side's respect in the debate, and indeed the respect in this chamber for civil discourse in this republic. Cancórla, the government have had their hand in encouraging a respectful debate on some occasions, but since coming into office, it's become increasingly clear it's disconnecting from the debate. I have argued that the government have read Naomi Klein's shock doctrine not as a warning but as a standard operating procedure. And I would argue that they're using the current crisis, where many people in society are distracted by the economic circumstances and their struggle to secure the welfare of their children, to alter our society in a way that would not be tolerated in less fraught times. They have sought to engage in this debate by attacking the character of those people opposing them. The pattern is typical, not just on this matter, but it's typical on a general approach. They have, as a result, degraded public discourse, stripping back the status of persons and groups in society only with the electoral might as a measure of their own status. This is how civic discourse ought to be conducted in a secular society, in a republic, or even in any republic worthy of its name. I don't think so. Others in this House have entered into the debate in a way that emulates the government's approach by attacking the characters of the opponents, rather than engaging with the arguments itself. In the recent past, we have seen a disgraceful attack. A disgraceful attack had been made against one faith community in this country, and if it had been directed at another faith community, most likely it would have been condemned by the very people and the very deputies that were making that attack. Many parts of this bill, Cancórla, are to be welcomed. They provide legal clarity for the medical professionals that are faced with a situation when a woman's life is at risk and where action is necessary to save her life, and where it would result in the unintended consequences of the death of the unborn. However, I'd like to argue that the bill contains some serious flaws. And once again, in this country, we find ourselves in the mystical belief that Irish exceptionalism, we somehow believe that we alone, as a jurisdiction, that we have an opportunity to do it differently, and that we can approach this legislation different than any other jurisdiction in the world. But the United Kingdom and California believed that same thing in the 1960s. They could never had envisaged at the introduction of their own legislation that they would have reached a situation where there is now a crisis of thousands and thousands of crisis pregnancies arising in their systems. And we haven't learned from other jurisdictions. In this area and many other areas, we have been determined to continue to make the mistakes, but rather we continue to copy and fail to learn, and as a society, we choose to learn the hard way. This determination flows from our own belief in this Irish exceptionalism. It may have happened in another country, but we're going to do it different. Cancurla, I don't think we will. The present economic calamity that we're enduring was caused by that same odd belief. We were told that property prices would continue to rise as the fundamentals in this country are different. We weren't. And it is truly said that the 6 most expensive words in the English language are that it'll be different this time. The sad truth is, I don't believe it is. Section 9 of the bill will lead to abortion becoming far more widely available than its supporters, some of them disingenuously, now claim. Many of those supporters of this bill need to be honest, first to themselves and then to the public. Some of the supporters of the bill know and hope, we've heard it here today in the Chamber, that things will change in the context of progressing further legislation. And they are being honest with themselves, yes, for sure, but perhaps they're certainly failing to be truthful to those whom they represent. When I raise objections, as I've often said in the past, that the usual response and the attack on people who critically analyse legislation is to attack them with slogans. The slogan that I don't trust women. Cancurla, people in general are trustworthy. People occasionally lie in order to achieve a purpose. Cancurla, some people are women. And I'm sorry to have to reduce it and to reduce this discussion to this ridiculous level, to spell it out this way, but I have to be forced to go that way. We have all seen the interviews of David Steele, who introduced abortion in the United Kingdom in the Abortion Act 67, where he has expressed regret on how the operation of that act has eventually worked out. He has stated that if he had known then what he knew now, then he wouldn't have proposed it. David Steele has some excuse. He did not know what we know now. Cancurla, 20 years from now, many of those who intend on supporting this bill will make that similar statement. They will express regret for their support. And it will be too late. It'll leave them guilty. Some may be foolish for not looking at the evidence around them, or worse, even dishonestly lying about them in this chamber. The rhetoric that has been deployed by supporters of this legislation contains much that is indeed dishonest. Those utterings such as I've outlined earlier on, I hope that those people who continue with those utterings are aware of their own dishonesty. For example, this is not a pro-life bill, and government ministers that state it know that. Cancurla, I'm old-fashioned to know and to believe enough that we have a duty in this House to be truthful. Opinion polls that ask you to, I quote, do you support legislation to protect life of the mother during pregnancy, and then present the result as if it being indicative of support for all aspects of the bill? It's not. Needless to say that most people who would answer that question, as I certainly would, I would say, of course I would support the legislation. I think it's important that medical professionals have clear and legal clarity around the circumstances in which they can intervene to save a woman's life, even when such interventions may result in the unintended death of the unborn baby. Ask in an opinion poll, do you support legislation that allows for abortion in the case of suicidal ideation, knowing that in every other jurisdiction where this has been brought in, it has led to abortion on demand? And what would the answer be? Ask in an opinion poll, do you support legislation that provides abortion up until the final week of pregnancy? Concurler, what do you think the answer would be? Ask in an opinion poll, do you support legislation that provides for a baby to be prematurely delivered into a disability and pain, into a lifetime of state care? What would the answer be? For me, Cancorla, I have to ask myself, what kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want to mandate and support on these type of actions? I have a concern about significant aspects of the latter observation in relation to the state taking hand active part into the precipitation of the conclusion of a pregnancy, where a baby will be born prematurely without any benchmark for pain, hurt, or our responsibility as a state for that child. I know that many people who would describe themselves as pro-choice, who would oppose this legislation without time limits, as there is no other civilized society in this world that would allow an abortion up until delivery. There is little doubt that the majority of Irish people would oppose that. The bill concerns, as a matter of significant importance, many, many important issues with respect to the welfare and health of a mother. A matter that has been subject to lively and ongoing debate for over 20 years, a matter upon which there is still division within Irish society. Only one of the four large political parties committed to legislation in this area in their manifesto, the junior party in government. Now, the government and other House actually have a mandate to pass this legislation. My firm belief that the only appropriate course of action is the action outlined by Deputy John Paul Phelan earlier on, and to place this bill in front of the people in a referendum to ascertain the point of view of Irish people. Opinion polls with loaded questions are not sufficient in this respect. We have been lumbered with a vast volume of rhetoric on the need for a new way in politics, on the need for reform. In fact, a democratic revolution we were promised. And I think that we need to see evidence in that with respect to this bill. I welcome the presence here this evening of the Minister. And Minister, I have outlined my views with respect to Section 9 of the bill. Much of those views are on public record. However, I'd like to talk to you on a matter that was recently brought to my attention by the Irish Independent journalist Derval MacDonald, legal correspondent, who wrote questioning how the bill, if enacted, will interact with the Mental Health Act 2001. Minister, you have given many reassurances that the belief that the numbers under the Section 9 of this bill would only be, to use your own words, a handful. We might quibble on what it would take, in other words, to expand on that and how you believe that. But could you give the House some assurance that it's not envisaged that any woman seeking an abortion under Section 9 would automatically be involuntarily admitted under the Mental Health Act? I would like you to give that assurance to the House here tonight. Under the Mental Health Act, a person may be involuntarily admitted where they are suffering from a mental illness and where there's a serious likelihood that they may cause immediate and serious harm to themselves or to others. Only one medical practitioner has to make this assessment in order to be involuntarily admitted to a hospital. Section 9 of the bill before us now requires 2 psychiatrists to find that a woman's life is at risk from suicide and that an abortion is required as part of that treatment. This standard seems to exceed the Mental Health Act. And I'd ask you to clarify, Minister, how these 2 pieces of legislation will interact, or how will they be reconciled? I know many people would describe themselves as pro-choice, and indeed I've outlined earlier that those who describe themselves as pro-life both hold genuine views. It's important in this debate, Minister, that we respect each other's positions, and as legislators, that we try and approach this very challenging piece of legislation to reconcile both positions in this legislation. Finally, Minister, I would be grateful if you would comment with respect to the provisions of the legislation that would provide for a 14-year jail sentence, potentially for a woman who attempted to secure an abortion in this country outside of the provisions of the legislation. I'd ask you to think long and hard about any prospect of further damaging the circumstances of a woman who would find herself in a crisis situation where she would live in fear of a threat that the state would pursue an action against a woman with respect to a crisis that she may find herself in. I'd ask you to reflect on that piece of proposal in the legislation. I think it's unacceptable. I think it's from an era gone by. I think it's a punishment. And this legislation shouldn't set out to punish.
I now call Deputy Keaveney.
I welcome an opportunity to discuss the bill